All right, hey folks, I am live, and before I start, let me make sure my audio video is coming out right. Yeah, looks like I'm up. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you're in North America, it's early morning. Europe, you're hopefully joining us in your late afternoon with a cup of coffee. Asia, APJ, it's evening for you. So welcome to Code It Live. So let's try building something today that maybe may not be as much fun, but it's kind of very relevant to just about every type of app we build nowadays: web, mobile, desktop. I do hear my toddler son having a meltdown in the background, so it's we don't even need to apologize anymore. We are all living through tough times, right? Hopefully not much of it is coming through on the microphone, but thank you for joining me here on Code It Live. I promise you're not going to see my gigantic face all through. I'm going to switch to my desktop. But let me just set some context. So last week, if you were here on Code It Live, we had a marathon 12-hour coding session, several sessions actually, called Quarantine Coding, because we are all quarantined. Again, no matter which part of the world you're living in. Oh, I see someone in the chat room, Ivana, that's my colleague, so hello Ivana. No matter which part of the world you are living in, it's a global pandemic, so hopefully you and your family are staying safe, maintaining social distancing. So we are all quarantined essentially, so we tried breaking up our team here at Progress Software into like teams of two, and then trying to build something fun, and then we kind of pitched ourselves against each other. So that was fun, but my good friend Ed dinged me a little bit, because essentially we were trying to get a service up so we could consume some data in our app, and just the backend part of the service, I had it ready so we could start building mobile apps and React web apps right away. So he was like, "You didn't code it this live." So I was like, yes, okay. I just set up the Azure services live. So it actually ended up being a little bit of work trying to set everything up. So I was thinking that today we are going to go walk back a little bit and start from scratch. Like, if you wanted to build a mobile app today or a web application, and you wanted your data to be accessible, you need to expose that data out through a service, right? And it doesn't matter where you keep it. You could keep your data in Azure, in AWS, in Kinvey, any other cloud provider, cloud infrastructure that you want to use. But the point is, you would need a service to let you have access to that data. And how you build that service is up to you. This doesn't need to be so complex, but turns out there are a few things you need to keep in mind if you're building that service from scratch, and where do you host it and so on. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Build a simple, like a backend as a service thing, a RESTful service, so we can read, write, and like have CRUD operations over our data, and be able to consume it from any type of application, .NET or JavaScript. Okay, so with that, let me switch over to my desktop. And hopefully you see that in a minute. All right, cool. So like I said, you can really have your data anywhere you want. It could be a little database under your table. It doesn't matter. As long as you have a way to access your data, that's what we're after. So all right, let me see. Oh, my good friend C# Fritz. Jeff Fritz is also online, so I got a notification. Let's try to build kind of a backend for our apps. So that's our going to be our database, as well as a service on top of it. So just for keeping this like open for everybody to kind of follow along and maybe do on your own, I'm going to use Azure. And again, you don't have to, you can really use anything, but I'm going to try to make up some fake data and then have access to it also through an Azure service, but that's something we're going to build by hand, okay? Let's just start with Azure first. And when it comes to storage and databases, you do have a lot of choices within Azure. You have SQL Azure, you have Postgres, MySQL, and then you get into like the table storage, which is non-relational, semi-structured data. You get into Cosmos DB, which is globally distributed multi-model cached databases. We don't need any of that complexity. All we want is just some simple relational data, maybe just for our mobile app. So let me start with a SQL database, and if you go in here, it'll tell you all the things that SQL Azure will do for you. Essentially, it is SQL Server running as a service in the cloud. So let's start here, and we're going to not need any of this complexity. All we need, I mean, of course, data security and protection is important, but for now, just to kind of test out our things, I'm just going to keep it open so we can all play around. Okay, so let's start, and I'm going to go in and log into my Azure portal here. All right, get in as that. And now we should have my Azure portal. You can see some services that I have deployed, but let's start from scratch. Okay. First thing is I'm going to go into my resources. You can see I have some accounts and some balances, which is nice. So let's start adding a new resource. Actually, I think it might be easier to just do a search here. If I do a search on SQL Azure, you get Azure databases for this SQL databases, okay? And I have a few, but let's go ahead and create a new one. This is kind of 101 of just creating a database in the first place. All right, so you have to pick your subscription. I'm going to stick to that. I might create a new resource group just to kind of keep things together. So let's call it Azure BaaS. Is that taken? No, I think we can use that. So that's my resource group. Essentially, resource group is like where you want to cluster, where you want to keep all of your database and your services all together. So that helps to keep things in one place. Database name, whatever, let's just call it a customer database, right? This is what you're building. All right, select a server. I think we can just create a new server. All right, server name, let's just call it customer server name. Okay. Should not contain reserved words. Okay. Let's just call it customer DB. No. Oh, essentially it's going to be hosted at database.windows.net. So it's trying to find something unique. Let's just say Azure customer DB. No, that's taken too. Let's just make it for Sam. Hopefully nobody has that taken. No, even that is taken. Okay. What shall we call it? Azure BaaS customer. Oh, it can only contain lowercase, so that's why it's giving me all the pain. Okay, sorry. So let's just say Azure customer. Okay, so that's good, right? So that's the name of my database server, and then I'm going to create a database inside of it. Okay, admin and password login. So all of you can see it. I don't care. I can bring this down at a later point of time, but I'm just going to keep it a simple admin. Okay, so that is clearly a reserved word. All right, folks, sorry about that. Looks like the stream went down for a second. I could have had like a network blip. Okay, so I am trying to set up my database server. That's my login password. This is going to be super complicated, just password. How about that? Oh, it needs a few things. Okay, I will set up a true password. All right, and let's confirm the password. All right, folks, there's something about the Azure portal. I don't know if my fan is spinning, and I don't know why the streaming software is getting overloaded, but hopefully we can stay on, because all we need is just to create this database and then we can be out of here. All right, so that's my new server that we are creating, and it's called Azure Customer. Elastic Pool, no, we don't really need that. Next, okay, connectivity method. We do want this public endpoint so we can reach it. Allow Azure services, yes. Allow current IP, yes. So we're keeping this open. Obviously, you want to put authentication and authorization and try to control it, the access to that server. Okay, do we want existing data? No. Database collection, that can stay. Advanced data security, not now. All right, tags we don't need, and it's going to give me a big monthly amount for the cost, but again, we're not going to keep this on for the whole month, so I can go ahead and create. So at this point, Azure is going to go do its thing and try to spin up a database for me, which is what it's doing, and it's going to tell me when it's done. And essentially what I want to do is create a table, put some data in it, and then actually build the service by hand, because there are a few services that we could use. And going back to essentially the days where we had like the initial versions of Azure SQL Server, there was a thing where you could like check a box and then you automatically got a RESTful endpoint out of it. But I can see why Microsoft doesn't want to keep supporting that, because again, not many people just use it as is. Most of us will roll with our own service backend. So essentially we're going to build an ASP.NET Core web API on top of .NET Core 3.1 and put some entity framework to work so we can talk to that database. Okay, it's still deploying. I'm doing this live on Azure, so you'll have to let Azure do its thing. You see that notification thing? It's thinking. Should be done soon, hopefully. In the meantime, once it comes up, here's what I want to do. I want to create a table and I want to put some data in it. So I used to do SQL a lot way back in the days. I don't anymore, so I'm going to look things up. One of my best resources to go to is W3 Schools. So what we need is create a DB. No, we got that. We need to create a table. So we can do things like this, but I do need a primary key, and I do need it auto increment, so I can insert things from like Fiddler or Postman, and then eventually from my client-side apps. So let's look that up. So it looks like if I had to do a primary key, then on SQL Server you have to do not null and then primary key, but I want a little bit more, and that's the auto increment thing. So essentially this one here, I think MySQL loves it to be just auto increment, and then SQL Server loves it to be identity. The 1 and the 1 essentially means like you start with the root of 1 and then you keep incrementing as records come in by 1, and you can control this. So this essentially means that the ID field of my table, I don't need to set that. I don't need to keep setting that explicitly from my client-side apps. I can just let the database do the inserts. So let's do that. And let's see if MySQL came back. We can close that out and let's go look at MySQL. Okay, looks like it's up, or no, it's still doing it because it's spinning up a whole SQL server in the background for me. All right. Folks in the chat room, if you have experience in deploying a web API on top of SQL Server, please chime in with your experiences. I'm trying to do something super basic. Okay, it's accepted, but it's still deploying that server. Okay, deployment is in progress. And then essentially, once this is done, we're going to create a table. We're going to put some data in it, and then we will go into creating an ASP.NET Web API. And we're going to use Entity Framework, which, I mean, we don't need a whole lot of Entity Framework, but we just need the bits so I can create a database context and be able to talk to that particular database and pull my records out as JSON. All right, so let's see. Let's copy this because this is what we will end up doing, creating a table just like that. We can call it persons. All right, I think Azure is finally done. Yes. All right, so which one did you do? That's my database, okay. All right, so I have a customer service and it's called Azure Customer. And this is a full-on SQL database at this point. So I can go into Query Editor, and you can also connect to this from your SQL Server Management Studio. So you absolutely do not need to do this in Azure. And I mean, if you think of having like a complex set of tables and like a big database, you definitely don't want to do it from Azure. Use the SQL Server Management Studio. Azure gives you the keys to go remotely get in and out and do your stuff. But we're doing something simple, so I can just get in like this. All right, we should be back, hopefully, after the blip. Yep. Yeah, it's something about, I think I've noticed the Azure portal kind of keeps OBS rather busy. But anyways, here's my spun up SQL server at this point. And if you look at the tables, we have none, right? So let's write SQL by hand. And obviously we can do this visually, but let's try writing some SQL that we can play around and create our table and put some data in it. So create table persons, we can stick to that. Since we made customer table, let's just call it a customer table. And we're going to change this to customer ID. Okay, so we want this to be integer, and then we want this identity of 1 and 1. Essentially, start at identity 1, and then keep incrementing by 1. I also have the primary key, and the primary key is needed for us to do the indexing right, and then be able to do the inserts as they come in. Okay, so first name, last name, I don't know, you can keep a null last name. So maybe we move this one up front. So first name, last name, and age is also an integer. We can do address and other things, but let's just do this. And if we fire this up, we should have a customer table. Affected rows is 0, but let's do a refresh. And now we should have the DBO customer, which is what we want. All right, so we have a table. Now let's do SQL inserts, just to have a few things to play around with, right? SQL insert. I'm sure I can write this by hand, but I'm trying to be lazy, because being lazy is good, right? References, where's my insert? Update, delete, insert into. Okay, I want to do some copy paste. All right, so I'm probably going to just copy this guy because it has the customer's table, and then we're going to just try to match it. All right, back to my Azure portal. Let's get rid of this guy, and let's say insert into. Instead of doing that, if I start typing in customers, it should give me the DBO customer thing, and now I can actually type it in. So we don't need the customer ID because we made that identity, right? So we can go with first name, last name, and age. I think that's what we decided, right? In our table. Yep. So customer ID is the primary key. We don't need to specify that. First name, last name, and age, right? That's what we are doing. And values. So this is where we get to keep values. I'm going to go Sam for myself. And let's see that. And I'm young, man. I'm 20. I'm just starting out. All right, run. Okay, we got one. Let's do a couple more. Let's do. Hey, it's my good friend Ivana hanging out in the chat room, so we will insert her into the table as a customer. And she's 100 years old, because obviously. Okay, so now if I go back in here and if I say select top 1000, I get my records, right? So notice the customer ID is being auto-incremented, which is nice, and it does not need us to be inserting that over and over again. And I have first name, last name, and age, just what we want. Right. Now, if this is your data, envision where you have a complex relational table, set of tables, maybe some primary keys and foreign keys linking these things up. But this is your data. And again, like I said, you don't care where this data is residing as long as you want to have an access to the data through a service. So that's my data. And let's just say we want access to this data in a mobile app. And I don't want to be writing SQL directly. I want a layer of abstraction and obfuscation so I can have my security. I can do my middle tier type stuff. So we need to write a service on top of this, right? So, but that's my data that I want to expose. So let's keep this here, and let's look into some ways in which we can build out this data. All right, so one of the things I had access to, and one of the things I was playing around that I thought would work nicely, and it does, but there are some things that it doesn't let us do because it's a black box. So let me show you the service that I'm talking about. So it's called SkyVia. And I like this because essentially what they do is bring back the thing that we used to have in SQL Azure, and that's an OData REST point. So for those of you who may not know OData is Open Data Access Protocol. It is it's not a company-owned thing. It's maintained by an open source community and a body, and essentially it's a set of specs, and it's a little advanced RESTful. So it does have support for all the REST verbs, which is create, read, update, and delete, and their corresponding HTTP verbs. But it does a little bit more. It gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to querying, filtering, sorting, and updates going back in the database. So what these guys do is actually fairly nice, and they can look at just about any table. They have connectors. They can look into any database server, essentially Salesforce, SQL Azure, MySQL, Amazon. The one that we are going to use is just, they have things into like OneDrive and Dropbox, but the thing that we are going to use is just SQL Server, which I think I'm sure they have it listed somewhere. Azure MySQL, so they have all of this stuff. So let me log in and I'll show you what they can do. And again, this is not the only thing. I mean, in fact, we at Progress Software, we have a data connectors offering where you can connect to just about any on-premises data storage and be able to expose data out. So let me log in and try creating a service out of it. Okay, hey folks, sorry, it's a quick crash again on my system. Hopefully it stays up. And Dan in Siegel, my good friend, hey Dan, Dan is saying we need to bring audio levels down, so hang on one second. Okay, how about that? All right, so I am in the SkyVia portal. I just logged in, and essentially we have an Azure database set up. Let me go ahead and close this because I think the Azure portal actually makes the browser spin quite a bit in terms of the workload. So let me go ahead and close that thing up, but I will have to go back to it and get our service URL back. So here I am, and the first thing I want to do is create a connection. And I can go ahead and create a SQL Server connection. I can create a new connection here. Now notice how it says SQL endpoint or OData endpoint. So what we want is an OData endpoint. And you want that simple mode, so you can literally look up which thing you want to talk to, which table. Let's go ahead and create a SQL thing. Oh, it's using an existing connection. That's not what we want. We want a new connection. So hang on, let me go back here. All right, I am in connections. And how do I create a connection? Okay, so this is where you create a connection to my SQL Server. Okay, so now it's going to ask for the server name, the database name, and your settings, essentially the credentials to get in. So I will have to get back in the Azure portal just really quick. And I did not pin my service, so I will have to pull it up. and it was this guy. So let me go ahead and pin this so I have it in my dashboard, but essentially this is what I need. I need the URL. Okay, so my server is that. No, that didn't copy that whole thing. I want the whole thing. There you go. So essentially this is a shortcut way of just exposing the service out. User ID, I think we called it Azure customer, right? And hey folks, I'm back. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's messing up my OBS over and over again. Hopefully it stays up. I closed down Azure portal. Let's see if it does what I needed to do and just stay on the connection. All right, so we are still trying to connect to our database. All that is fine. Right, let's test our connection. We haven't gotten to code yet. We're still just setting up our SQL Server. It's trying. Connection is successful. Okay, so we can now talk to our SQL Server database in the backend, which is good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right, so now here's the nice thing. So since we put in the connection details of exactly which server it is, what the endpoint is, and the name of the database server, it can go look and it pulls up the table. So Azure by default has these like firewall rules, and then it pulls up the customer table, which is what we need. So if I go look into this, you will see the customer data coming in as is from the database. So that's the customer ID, first name, last name, age. So I want all of that to be visible. And that's it. And then I can hit apply. And at this point, if I go next step, I do want this to be public. Okay. And you can obviously make it like specific IP addresses or specific user accounts that can have access to it. And then we can, this is the, let's call it Azure Customer Endpoint. OData 4 is the latest support for it, and we want read-only or read-write. Let's just do read-write and save. Okay, so at this point, what you get from Skyfire is a URL. Essentially, it's a wrapper. It's a black box. You don't see exactly what's going on inside, but you have a URL that is a OData RESTful endpoint on top of your server. So let me open this up, and essentially, if you can see that it says, hey, there's an entity that I know of, because it does a little reflection on the tables, and it finds the customer entity, right? So if I go into customers, I should get JSON back, which I can zoom in. So you see that? That's just pure JSON coming out. That's me and Ivana in the database. All right, in the chat room, Emriel Demir is saying, is there any tool that cuts the stream automatically when you're filling in a password text box? Yes, that's actually a very good point. I should not be filling in, but hopefully I have masks. But I'll try to look this up. If you follow me on Twitter, which is at SAMIDIP, it's down at the bottom of the screen. Somebody from the Azure team, one of the Azure dev advocates, had written a thing where it does put a little mask on your text fields as you're typing it in, so it just gives you a little more security. So I'll try to look it up, and I'll tweet that out. Okay, so at this point I have a RESTful endpoint, and without writing any code, which is kind of what we want. But my experience with Skyfire is like I couldn't do all of the things that I wanted it to do. So if I go in here and open up Postman, which is a nice tool from Google that lets us have access to APIs and be able to test them out before you go write some code in your app, we can do all of that right here and kind of fake our things. So let's close these things here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new request. And here, let's do a get. And let's go ahead and pull up that URL, and we are going to put that thing in and just do a plain get. So at this point, we should be hitting the same service. Okay, chat room is saying, Dan Siegel, we all know your password is. Yes, it's actually even better. It's just password. And Ivana, yes, you're in the database. You're immortal. All right, so we get OData, and we get a certain context that it's giving you metadata, and this is nicely formatted JSON, and you get the IDs and the details back from the database, which is what we want. Now, here's the thing that I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but if I go look into my database service, this is the OData service, if I go look at the model, it will pull up the customer DB. I am supporting OData 4. It's not read-only, and it does give you a nice log of all the gets and all the things that's hitting the service. If I'm not mistaken, I could not get post to work on this. So I'll try real quick. I'm going to grab one of these things here and try a post. So same URL, but now we can add a few things. Connection, all that is good. I want to add this as just a raw body. All right, so I'm going to paste this in. Did we not copy? Okay. All right, we don't need the customer ID. That's going to be auto incremented. All right, so first name is test, and last name is test. Age is 40. So I'm going to set this thing as JSON because that's what I'm posting. It doesn't like something. Oh, this comma. All right, so that is JSON. That is the flattened structure of a single record. And then I think I need to set the content type, which it's already set to application JSON. So that's perfect. That's all I need, in fact. So that's a post. I can do a put as well. Ivana in the chat room is saying, I'm not 100. Yes, you're not. All right, so let's do a send. Actually, that did work. Okay, so I'm surprised because the last time I was trying and fiddling around with this, it did not work. But looks like the server came back to say customer ID is 3, so it did do an insert. So let's go back here and pull this up again. We do that. Okay, so we do get 1, 2, and 3, which is what we want. Okay, so we got Sam, Ivana, and Test in our database. So this is fine if you want to use a third-party service, and Skyfi is probably not the only one. There are multiple services like this which will talk to a database and pull up a service for you, and it's an OData REST point, so you can do whatever CRUD updates with it, but it's still a black box, right? So ideally, unless you are just looking for a RESTful service on top of your data, this is not going to give you everything out of the box. It is a wrapper. It's a black box that's just probably just exposing the 4 HTTP verbs and supporting OData. What if you wanted to roll your own and write this up? All right, chat room. Emriel Demir is saying choose your side. What do you mean, customer? Oh, chatroom did not accept new line characters. Oh, you're going to try SQL inserts on my database, aren't you? No, it's funny. So OWASP, which is the Open Web Security Protocol thingy, they publish like security threats for web applications every month, I think, and like for 15-20 years now, they're like in the top 10. You always see SQL injection. I was like, people, we should be past this at this point. We know how to protect SQL databases against like with parameters and stuff, but my database is completely open because all we're trying to do is have access to it. All right, so we have our service again. If a third-party service is what you want to do, go ahead and do that. The authorization, the authentication, and then any type of middleware, which is like custom stuff on top of your database, that's not something you can do unless you roll with your own service, right? So let's try doing that. So the first thing I'm going to start doing up is building a web API. Now, hopefully most of you are .NET devs. If not, I can provide a quick history of where this is. So ASP.NET is Microsoft's way of building web applications, and things have evolved quite a bit. You can do web forms, you can do MVC, you can do Razor pages, and you can do also Blazor. So this is all C#, and it's .NET. And for most of the history, ASP.NET has been a server-side technology. Now you can be smart about it. You don't have to come back to the server for everything. You can Ajaxify your calls and only come back to the server for data refreshes. But going forward with Blazor, you should be able to also run C# front and back. So right now Blazor is server-side only, and you are maintaining a SignalR real-time connection between the server and the client-side DOM. But moving forward, hopefully by the middle of this year, you will be able to do C# all out in the browser with WebAssembly. But that's all the web application side of things. The other aspect of ASP.NET is Web API, and this is where it really shines because it's really, really quick. I see some fun stuff going on in the chat room with Ivana, and I'm Real Dimir. So yes, so what we're going to try doing is a web API essentially. So it is a web application, but it's not going to be something that has a lot of visual, because it's meant to just provide easy access to data. And this is where it really shines, because this is running on top of .NET Core now, and .NET Core is really, really fast, and it's optimized, it's lean, it's modular. So you get all the benefits of .NET, and you have a simple RESTful API that you want to expose on top of your database. A lot of .NET enterprises really have gone to a mode of having a web API as their backend, and then the client side could be anything. You could be building mobile apps with Xamarin or React Native or native apps, or you could be using SPA technologies like any of the JavaScript frameworks, but you are talking to a web API backend. So that's kind of what we are going to start off with. So if I go in here, this is taking us straight into our into the docs. Now, for those of you who are in the Xamarin land a little bit like me, I do a lot of Xamarin, you will remember that we had a thing for mobile developers, right? And it was called Azure Mobile Services. Let me see what it pulls up now. So they still have the documentation out there, and they talk about it, mobile apps, but this is not what it used to be. I don't think they support it the way it used to be, because the point was this is going to have let you have an easy RESTful service. It's going to let you do push notifications and authentication and authorization. I think you can still combine multiple things into a service that does most of it, but this is not doing all the things that mobile services were meant to do. Essentially, it's a web app at this point, and they have taken away some of the things that mobile apps used to do. It, I think, comes down to economics and what kind of services they want supporting on Azure. All right, Dan Siegel, my good friend, is saying they've abandoned every attempt they've made for a mobile backend. Yes. I don't know why. I don't know why, if this is just a matter of, I mean, mobile is hard. Mobile apps are hard in terms of the life cycle of all the things we want to build, and maybe just the economics of it and how many people were using mobile backend as a service, maybe just did not justify them doing this. So it is sad, but again, all of the things that make up your mobile app service, you can still do it. You just have to manually put things together. You can do authentication, authorization. You can use CDNs if you're deploying apps to like every corner of the world. You want your app assets to be delivered close to you. You can do that. You can do RESTful services, but you have to kind of combine the pieces by yourself, essentially. So this is no more, but if you look at the documentation, they still have it, and it's a little confusing because they used to throw like sample projects, and you can still build those projects, but they are not based on the latest .NET Core runtime, so it gets a little confusing. So we're going to start from scratch, right? So a web API, ASP.NET Core, that's what we're doing. And it talks you through exactly all the things we could do, the get, post, put, delete, all the things we're about to build. And then this is the web project which we're going to start up building. So let's open up our good friend Visual Studio. All right, we are going to create a new thing here. And this choice is actually important because you don't want the full ASP.NET thing. You just want just the web API. So if I go in here, if I pick .NET Core app, look at all the things you can do, because I have the web stuff installed, obviously, and you can do other things with .NET Core. You don't want all of this stuff. You just want the thing with which is an API, right? So this is essentially just the web API part of it that we want. So let's hit next. It runs in .NET Core 3.1. Good. All right, let's give it a name. Let's call it, well, we'll have to match up this name, right? So let's create our service first, and let's see what kind of name we can get, because we will throw this up on an Azure service as well. So let's get in. I like matching my project name to what I would deploy, right? So let's go ahead and create a new resource. All right, resources. I think I can just look up web apps, app services. So app services is essentially all types of web apps, and you'll notice that I had a few like mobile backend type projects back in the days, but we can just do a simple web app at this point. All right, go ahead and add. Oh, okay. What was that? Add. There you go. It's starting. Okay. Resource group. Let's reuse this resource group that we just started. Web app name. Let's see what we can get, because it is publicly hosted, right? So I can do, let's see, Azure BaaS customer. Is that available? Yes. Okay. Right. So that's good. Do you want publishing code, Docker? No, just go with code. Okay, now this runtime stack is important, because you can do Node.js, you can do ASP.NET, Java, anything like that. .NET Core 3.1 is okay. Operating system, let's do Windows. Why does it not let me pick? So I can do Python, Ruby, all of that is good stuff. Oh, so you actually cannot run .NET Core 3.1 on Azure? That's could be a new thing. Maybe it's coming along. But it looks like if you pick .NET Core 3, I can still do Windows. So we'll see if I have a .NET Core 3.1 web API, if I can still deploy to that thing. Let's do East US for me, because I'm in the East US. All that stuff is fine. Next is monitoring. Enable app insights. No for now. I can just keep it simple. No tags either, and that's my service. Okay, and go ahead and hit create. So it's called Azure BaaS customer, right? So while it is doing its thing, and hopefully my stream is on, because apparently the Azure portal keeps my browser super busy, so hopefully that thing can stay on. So let's do Azure BaaS customer. Okay, it can stay there. Create. All right, so Visual Studio is spinning up a web API solution at this point. And we'll let Azure do its thing. There are two things we're going to need out of this. First is the SQL server that we created. We need a connection string so we can go talk to it. And once we are ready, we will also need the service URL and exactly the service, so we can deploy our web API project onto that service. Okay, but I think we can start. So here's my .NET Core 3.1 web API project. This is nothing out of ordinary, simple MVC type structure. You get some controllers, I think, out of the box. Oh, so I think out of the box they give you like a weather forecast and a controller. So let's do a quick build and make sure we're able to build. Excuse me. I'm going to close this and let the deployment go, because again, like I said, the portal is not my friend. Okay, so build is successful. If I run this thing now, oh, it's doing a yes, okay, because by default it tries doing a certificate. Okay, so hopefully you can still hear me, you can see me. While writing the password, stream is paused. All right. Okay, so let's go back and see what we created here. I did close down the solution. Now it's back. It's restoring the packages. I don't want it to do a build right now. Okay, so can I run this? Yes, stop. Oh, it's not running. Visual Studio is having a hard time shutting down the application that is running. Maybe it's stuck here on the HTTPS certificate thing. Yes. Okay, is it running now? Okay. So you have the certificate. You should let me run now. This is the whole thing with the newest .NET Core 3.1 ASP.NET projects needing a development certificate so they can enable HTTPS even on the server. All right. Sorry about the glitches that we're having. If you're still in the chat room, hopefully you can still see me and hear me. Okay, looks like I'm up. Okay. I'm going to keep an eye out on a couple of things that were resource hungry that was causing the crashes, and hopefully we don't keep seeing that. Okay, so where were we? We were spinning up a web API project, and we had the endpoint running here on localhost 5001, and essentially we are just trying to get it to do its thing. Okay, so we have our little service here that's at ASP.NET Web API, and it is running on .NET Core 3.1, and right now it's just the default. If I go look in the startup, so what it's doing is a bunch of things, configuring services and then using the routing and pushing it out. And let me check, I think I'm still up, okay. And then if I go back to my Visual Studio here, I think the program.cs essentially spins up the web host, and then there's an app setting JSON that kind of controls exactly where the starting point is. Launch settings.json is where the starting point is. So it goes to weather forecast by default. Okay, so in here, let's that's all good. Let's try writing some new stuff here. So I am going to go ahead and create a new class. Well, actually, let me write a models for property folder first. New folder, just to keep things nicely organized. And in my new folder, I'm going to create a new class. And let's call it customer. All right, so here's my customer class. I don't think I need a initializer right away. I think I'm still on the stream. I can hear myself, I can see myself, so if you cannot, let me know. All right, so in here, let's start writing up kind of a model that looks like our database that's on it. That's on the SQL Server side of things. So I'll have public, it's going to be an integer, and we called it customer ID, and just essentially a whole bunch of getters and setters. Okay, and let's do a few more things. We had first name. Let's copy these guys, and let's do last name, and we had an age, I think, which we probably should have done. Should have made it an integer. Maybe I did. Okay, let me go and check what the data types were on Azure real quick. So let me go back to my SQL database. That's my database here. I'm going to pull up the query editor and get in. Okay, let's do a check on the tables here. That's my customer table. I did make it an integer that's nullable. Okay, so customer ID, first name, last name, age. All right. All right, so that's all I need. Now, one thing I will need out of this SQL database, yes, you can discard those changes, is a connection string. Now, there are multiple things that you can do ODBC, but I'm just going to do ADIO.NET. So I'm just going to copy this. Again, this is sensitive, so I'm just going to keep it here. All right, and close that portal down. Okay, so let's go back to our Dan Siegel in the chat room is saying, are you going back to MySQL database or? No, it was SQL Server. Oh, MySQL. Okay, not MySQL, SQL Server database. Okay, so I have this thing down, but I think the other thing I need to do is just mention that this thing is a primary key. And it's not going to like that until I bring in, I think it's data annotations. What is it called? System dot, no. Component model dot data annotations. Yep. So I need that. So this way, my my business object here replicates exactly what my SQL table is. That's just a customer table. Okay, I think that's all I need. Now, one thing I will do is bring in EF at this point. Again, I don't need much of EF, but I just do need the DB context, so I can have a local list of things. And then we're going to bring in JSON as well, which it's obviously always the first NuGet that comes up. Let's go ahead and add that. And we'll look at our dependencies here. NuGet packages, JSON is in. Let's also bring in Entity Framework. Okay, EF core is what we need. And I think there's a SQL Server one as well. We'll grab both of those two. Add. Yes, I accept the licenses. It was a bad joke, Dan. No, there's no such thing as a bad joke. It's all good. All right, we'll wait for the NuGet packages to come in. Oh, more licenses to accept. Okay, so those two things are in, and now let's add what's called essentially, you see where I'm going with this. I am going to create a web API. There is some nice scaffolding, but then I think there are some like gotchas that you need to know. But I'm setting up my my model, my data entity first, and then a context class, and then I'm going to add the controllers that actually do its thing. So let's call this our customer context. All right, Dan, you can bring out all the bad jokes that you want in the chat room. Okay, so we have a context class, and essentially this context class is the one that I want to talk to the database and have the context of what we are doing. So in here, I'm going to bring in entity framework. I think it's Microsoft.entity framework core. Yes. All right. Make sure if you're doing this on .NET Core, you want to get entity framework core, because entity framework and entity framework core are different. Okay, so I have that, and now I can leave that initializer in place. I think this is where I can go back to the docs a little bit and see what the next steps were. Okay, so create new project, done that. This test is just out of the weather thing. The model class, we did that. Database context, we did that. We got the NuGet packages in, and that's my DB context class. Okay, so that's what I need to do. So essentially have a context and then a DB set. All right, so let's go back in here, and I'm going to make this my DB context class. Okay, what's next? Okay, I think at some point in here, I'm going to need to plug in my, excuse me, my connection string. All right, let's do this first thing. You can see how I code. It's a lot of copy and paste, which I think is true for a lot of people. Nothing wrong in that. I don't like it like that. Let me bring that up here, and I can close that here. Okay, so it doesn't know what to-do context is. It needs to be customer context. And it doesn't not know what this is, so this also needs to be customer context option. So this, I think, is just a sorry about my voice. So this, I think, is just a pass-through to let it do its thing with the base. But I think now I get to define my DB set. So public DB set, I think. Yep. So DB set of the type customer. So that's what I need. And we can call this customer set and get set. Okay. Is that good? Visual Studio? Yes. All right, so I think that's all I need. Essentially, this one is just setting up the context of what the data is and then where to go and find it. And here's where we're going to have our local DB collection of our stuff. Let me move this in here just for the sake of consistency. So that's my context class. Okay. Now, this is where I think it gets interesting. And there are some, I think, tooling differences between what Visual Studio on Windows will do and Visual Studio on Mac will do. Okay, so Dan Siegel is chiming in. Two differences between junior and senior devs. The senior dev understands the code they copied. The senior dev may just have copied code from their own blog post they wrote so they could trust the source. Yes. Yes, it's funny when you want to look up stuff and then you end up on your own blog post. But yes, if copying code is totally fine from Stack Overflow or wherever else, the docs actually is perfectly safe as long as you're understanding what you are doing. Okay, now this is where we are going to differ a little bit. So I think what the ASP.NET docs do is see in the startup.cs they are configuring. So startup.cs is the ASP.NET way of doing dependency injection, and they want to insert all the things that your app is going to need and bring them in as dependencies, and then it's configuring the pipeline of what your ASP.NET server and your app is going to do. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go in here and let's open up our startup file. We'll get rid of the weather forecast things, which we don't need anymore, because we're dealing with customer data. Okay, so first thing up here is I need to bring in my entity framework. If I can type entity framework core, and I think it made a separate model out of this one. So Azure BaaS customer models. So using, okay, so now I should have access to both my my model class and my DB context, right? So that's what I need. Okay, so let me take a look as to exactly what startup thing I need, and I think it's just the DB context. So I'm going to copy paste some stuff here, but we're not going to use the in-memory stuff. And I think the ordering of this matters a little bit. We want to do this before we add the controllers. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio. Before we add the controllers, right here is where we're going to paste this one in. All right, so it did a bunch of things that I don't want. I don't have a to-do context. What I do have is a customer context, and I do like spreading it out. So essentially what we're doing is using a delegate to do the whole thing. I don't want that. And this is where I think the syntax gets interesting. Options dot use. Okay, so when I say use, essentially it's saying I am a DB context type dependency, but what type of thing do you want to use to have the context go talk? So you can do all of these things, memory cache, but we want to use this thing called use SQL Server. And I think the parameters, the signature of this method is a connection string and then some SQL Server options. So let's just say a string, and then I don't think we need the SQL Server options. What's the other one? So one is this, and two is infrastructure, which is even more stuff we don't need. Okay. In the chat room, Emerald Dimmer is saying, I'm not sure about leaving the default constructor in the DB context class may lead to malfunction. I don't know. If it gives me errors, we'll take it out. Okay, so let's, if I can type, let's keep that null. But I mean, to Emerald Dimmer's point, I mean, essentially it is, no wait, I didn't end this right. Okay, so there you go. To that point, essentially, if I go look into my customer context, I have two ways of initializing the customer context. One is just empty, straight out of the box, and then out of the other one is the one with the options. So if it gives me errors, I'll wipe it out. Okay, so back to, let me close down a few things that I'm not doing anything with program.cs, application.json, not doing anything. Not doing anything here. I will need the launch settings because essentially it's launching into this weather forecast thing, which we're not using. So I will go back and fix it. Okay, so add DB context. We got the DB context of customer, and this is where I think we need to plug in our SQL. So please don't look. Close your eyes. That's all right. It's just a connection string. I'm just going to plug in this whole thing right in here. Okay, so this is the traditional AD.NET thing. So it is going to ask you for the initial catalog. You can see right here is the database name, and it's going to ask you for your credentials, which I hope it has. Oh, it actually did not type it in. Eek. All right, is it going to be? You can see my password. It's all right. Okay. So I got my DB context, right? And what else do I need? Let's go back to the docs. That's it, right? Oh, now we have to scaffold the controller. That's all good. So let's go back here to Visual Studio and let's do a build. Okay, build is good. All right, so at this point, what we have done is we have a model which matches the database table with a key. We have a context, which is bringing in Entity Framework and creating a DB set and giving us a way to initialize this. And then in the startup, we did a DB context service, which is going to use Entity Framework and go talk to my SQL Server. Okay, I think that's it. Now, this is where I think there are some tiny differences. If I am on Visual Studio on Windows, this is what I will do. I will right-click and create a new scaffolding thing. I think in Visual Studio for Mac, it's doing a slightly different thing. So here, if you go to VS for Mac or VS for Code, you will see that they ask you to design all of, or bring in these two packages so it can do that. Let me go ahead and do this just in case we have those packages. I think I can right click and where's tools? Open in terminal, and I can do that. So it's adding a package which I can bring in through NuGet as well, but just the code generation package is what it's bringing in. Let's give it a second, and it looks like that's done. Next up is this Entity Framework Core. Oh, that's the different package. It's .design. All right, we'll do that. You can see those packages coming right in here. So I got Entity Framework Core, I got SQL Server, I got Code Generation Design, and now I have hopefully one more thing. Okay, stat restore completed. What else am I missing? Oh, now the ASP.NET Code Generator. Let's get that. Back to my terminal, to that. Already installed. Oh, I see. I may have done this before and it's globally installed, so that's perfect. So what the docs are asking you to do is use that ASP.NET Code Generator, point it to that controller, and point it to the item and the context that you need, and then go ahead and build it, which I may end up doing, but let me see what the scaffolding thing does essentially. So I have all of these NuGet packages in place, and now I can go into controllers. Make sure you're going into the controllers directory so you can see that option. So if I go in here and say new scaffolding, you get all of these scaffolding options for ASP.NET projects. So you will see this if you have the ASP.NET tools installed. So the web project tools installed for Visual Studio on a Mac, and of course on Windows it's the same thing. So MVC controllers, Razor pages, what I need is the API. So if I do an API read write, I think this one actually does not want to use Entity Framework, and this is the one that you want to use, API controller with actions. So let me go ahead and do that and see what we get. So right here it's saying model class to use. I can pick customer, that's my model class, which is nice. Now the DB context class is the customer context. Oops, come on, there you go. And the controller name is going to be customer controller. We can deal with routing. I think we can take out the controller keyword and finish. And let's see what it does in terms of scaffolding. It's checking NuGet packages are installed. Adding a few more things, adding SQLite, interesting. So it's giving you the option. So in case you wanted to have a local DB set and not pull down from network all the time, you can have it, and then you can cache it. And maybe you're building a mobile app and you want like some sync functionality. You can have a SQLite storage and then sync when you have a connection to the internet. Okay, it's still trying to do something. I don't see the controller being added. It's adding packages still. Come on, Visual Studio. I see that I'm going a little over my time. I was hoping for an hour, but things take time. Building a project, okay. Come on, Visual Studio. Okay, it's running some scripts, and you see that finding the generator, attempting to compile, adding the controller, and it's done. Okay, what did you do? Okay, it dropped in that customer controller. Okay, all right, so this is what I think I wanted to point out. So essentially we made that right click, add the scaffolding tool, and we picked API with actions over Entity Framework. And if you look at the controller that it spit out, it has the get, but it's trying to return a view, which is not what I want. I mean, this is not a web app. I don't want a view. I want just like straight up data to be returned, like that kind of a list to be returned. So I can go ahead and give a little bit of a hard time to some of my good friends who work on the docs team, because I think for Visual Studio it's not quite right. The scaffolding isn't quite right. So let me go ahead and kill this thing. Delete. Yes, go ahead and delete that. So we'll redo this again, and I think we have to go ahead and do this the ASP.NET Code Gen route. Because the Entity Framework API, if you just pick the Entity Framework API, it's not going to use all of the things that we need. So let's go back in here and let me clear this out. Back in Visual Studio so we can see it, and now let's do this in the terminal. Okay, so .NET ASP Net Code Generator controller name. We don't want that to be a to-do list. We would like this to be a customer controller. Okay, customer controller. Yes, async API is what I need. We don't need the to-do item. We do need the customer item. I don't know what DC does, but that's another context, looks like. Customer context, and the output directory is controllers. Okay, that's fair. So customer controller is what I need. Okay, in the chat room, Emerald Dimir is saying you could write all the CRUD methods manually. Yes, I could pretty much write all the CRUD, but I'm being lazy. That's why the scaffolding is there for. It should do its thing. All right, so customer context, customer controller, let's go. So we'll see what this tool does. Is it building? Hopefully the stream is still up. Yeah, essentially, like the chat room was pointing out, we need 4 methods. We need create, read, update, and delete, and the corresponding things to pull from that DB context. That's all. But this shouldn't be so difficult. And apparently the command line tool, I think, is the better one. So let's go ahead and look at this. Okay, so this is what we want. See, this one is clearly marking this controller class with the route API controller, and it has that controller base. This is my get. So this is my HTTP get. If you hit my service, and it's just going to return the customer list just straight up, an enumerable list of customers. Here's my get with a certain ID, so that's good. It's going to go find that, find async on that ID. This is my post with an ID, and this is my straight up HTTP post where if you're trying to insert a new ID, and this is my delete. So that's it. And I think this one is kind of more like the put, which is the grab an ID or trying to update something. Okay, so I think that's what we want. So essentially, don't use the Visual Studio Mac visual scaffolder, use the tools scaffolder. I think that just works better. Okay, so we are doing a build, and then we shall see where we are at. Okay, build is successful. Let's go ahead and run this. Hopefully the local dev certificate doesn't give me any more pain. Okay, no, we're good. All right, so you can see that I fired up localhost 5001, and weather forecast is where it's going, which is not what we need. We need this to be API, if I can get the URL right, API, and then customer, again by definition and by like kind of normal way of working. The routing is it skips the name of the controller, so it's just the customer controller is just customer. So if I hit that, and let's see, login failed for Azure customer. Oh, so it actually did try to go to MySQL and the login failed. Why so? Could be MySQL connection string, and you're going to see me edit that again. That's all right. You're all friends in the chat room, right? All right, let's look at my connection string. See, server TCP, that is my database. Yes, initial catalog, customer, that's my database. Persist info is true. ID is this. Maybe it needs to be a string. It's just my name. And okay, yeah, looks about right. Let's try it again. Hey, look at my good friend Sultan Burnham, Chris DeMars. Hey, Chris. Good to see you here, and you can see me struggle through stuff. So we are building a web API project over SQL Server, sitting on Azure. All right. Hopefully this should not take us any longer than what sanity dictates. Why is it failing to log into my database? That doesn't make any sense. All right, hang on. Let's do the brute force way. Oh, maybe it doesn't like this thing. Yeah. How about that, Azure? Take that. Straight up. SQL Server. Connection string. The Bandit Dave. Hello, hello. Do I know you? Your name sounds familiar from Twitter handles. Okay, so let's go to API, customer. Okay, so it's better. Now we got in invalid object name customer set. All right, I don't know what that means. Why is it not a valid name? Let me close my terminal down. Okay, so we clearly went here, customer ID, first name, last name. For those of you who just joined, maybe I should recap. So we have a table sitting in Azure, and I can show you that real quick. We met, okay, so chat room is saying we meet at the method conference. Yay! Hey, good to see you. I was at a conference in Springfield, Missouri just a few weeks back, and looks like I have somebody in the chat room who saw me there, so hello. All right, so what am I missing? So let's go to Azure. And let's go through my account. Azure portal has not been my friend today, but we're going to try being brave one more time. So here is my table. I'm going to log in, and that's what we're after. So DBO customer is my table, customer ID, first name, last name, age. So that pretty much matches what I have. I can leave that site. So customer ID, first name, last name. It didn't complain about something here. It's complaining about what am I missing? Customer controller has all of those things, the CRUD in place. Okay, in the chat room, check the DB context class, Sam. You left the DB context property name as customer set, probably. Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, you have the right idea. So DB set customer property name as customer set. That's just my property name. I should be able to call it whatever I want. Does it need to be customer context? I'm not, you need to name it just as the customer. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so I think it's just trying to, I mean, it did a fetch from the database, and then for the DB set of the type customer, I think this is weird, because like, why does it need to have the name that's matching my table? I don't know. I clearly don't know enough about Web API and what it's trying to do. Because in the chat room, Emriel Demir is saying you need to name it just as the customer. Okay. All right. I don't know. We'll try. Oh. So now it's going to complain all about the customer set. Okay. So we have to regenerate our thing again. let's do that. It's not a big deal. Delete that, go away, back to Web API, and I'm going to copy this whole thing and paste that in here. Let's change up the name. Customer controller, and my model is just called customer, and my context is called customer context, output directory in that. So that's what I need. All right, back to Visual Studio. Okay, so it looks like chat room is giving us an explanation. Emerald Demir, thank you. Our customers, it depends on the naming convention that EF is set to. Okay, we'll leave it customer. Well, let's try that first. All right, let's go to tools, open in terminal. I already had a terminal open. Okay, let's try this one more time. So customer controller, output directory controllers, go do your thing. So essentially what we're doing is trying to scaffold out the CRUD. The visual way of doing the CRUD seems not quite doing exactly what I want. So let's try this one. All right, now we have another brand new customer controller. It's using the customer context, and now it has the enumerable of the type customer. Hopefully that's all that Web API needs. All right, let's do a build. All right, that built. Let's start. Okay, that's still the weather forecast, which I need to get rid of it. All right. Oh no, that's the older thing I was playing around with, API customer. How about that? Yay, we have success. All right, look how happy we get. Just being able to pull some data out of a database makes us happy. How low is our bar? But we have data. On localhost, we are hitting up SQL. So now let's pull up Postman. My favorite networking tool is actually Fiddler. But if I pull it up, you're going to see a little blip in the stream. Yay, woohoo! Because it's going to try to replacing the proxy, which I don't want it to do right now. So let's, if I can paste. All right, I'm going to do a get here. All right, localhost 5001 API customer. Let's go send. Okay, I get data back. See, me, Ivana's test. Now, let's try the post. Since how low is your bar? And Dan Siegel in the chat room is saying, hard to say. Day 587 of quarantine. Yeah, it's funny how we are living our days. Like, wake up, do your stuff, eat, and go back to bed. Your day is done. All right. So speaking of Dan, let's grab Dan here. Dan is quarantined. So we're going to call him Dan quarantined. Dan is old. All right. So now we are hitting up localhost 5001, that API, and we're trying to do a post. Okay, shall we try? Send. Yay, you got in. You got in, my brother, you are in. Now let me go back and pull up the Sky Via thing that I was talking about, because that also has a URL that's sitting on it. Right, come on, come on. Here are all my endpoints. Azure customer is my endpoint. If I go look up that thing, should be the same endpoint. And let's do customer. No? Wait, what is it called? Customers, okay. Jeez. 404 sounds like a way of shouting at me. What do you not like? That's my entity name. Come on. Oh, is it case sensitive? That sounds very insensitive that if you're case sensitive. Apparently, okay. So we have the URI and it's doing our get and put and post. Perfect. All right. So let's go back to Visual Studio, close this thing down. And we are now ready with our service that just does reads and writes. It's completely open, so there is no authentication, but that's okay, just for now. But here's what I want to do. Go into launch settings. And this is the thing that I don't like. Launch URL. How about I call it API/customer. Yeah, 5001, that's fine. And I'm going to copy this guy over so we don't see that weather forecast thing over and over again. Let's get rid of these files. Get rid of that. And get rid of that. All right. Let's do a build. All right, now let's do a run. And hopefully now it doesn't start with the weather forecast thing. It should start straight up with 5001 localhost API customer. Perfect. All right, that's all I need. Now let's close down these things here, and here's what I will do. Friends, don't let friends right click and publish to Azure. Okay, new person in the chat room, what are you building? I am building a simple web API. It's an ASP.NET Web API running on .NET Core 3.1, and I am pointing to my SQL Azure database that's sitting in Azure. So I have a simple connection string. If you look into my startup.cs, I have a DB context, and it's pointing to SQL Server. That's the long connection string, and then I'm getting in and I'm doing my stuff. Here is my model, which is just a simple table, and here's my customer context. So I'm pointing to it and I'm using entity framework, DB set, and that's it. And then I scaffolded out this controller, which gets me the get and the set and all of that stuff. So I can go look this up, and if I do, let's try this. If I do a get, and if I try customer number 3, oh, that didn't work. Send. Oh, it's not running. Okay. Let's do run again. Okay, so this guy is up, and now I can go to Postman and give me customer number 3, please. Yes, so I can get 3, and customer number 4 is our good friend Dan. So let's see. Yes, we get Dan Quarantine back. Okay, so our service is ready and working, and this is where we're going to go spin up an Azure. Oh, and I actually did have an Azure app service waiting. So this is not what you want to do ever, but I can, because so by default Visual Studio knows to look into my subscriptions and find out the app services that I have working. So that's my app service, Azure BaaS customer service, right? So go ahead and publish this. And it's going to spin up a few things. This is no different from right click and publish to a folder. It's just a bunch of files. I just want a globally accessible URI. And while it's building, if any of you want to play around with this, I can give you the URLs just so you see what they are. I think you froze. I am still seeing myself. I can hear you, but I can't see anything you're talking about. Uh-oh. Could be a network, Dan. I see myself on the stream, and that seems to be holding up. I can never be sure with all of the OBS software that we use. I've tried like 2-3 different things. So this is our endpoint, and I'm just going to post this because all of you in the chat room are nerdy, and you're going to bring my database down. But that's the URL of something that, oops, I didn't want to go there. Stop. All right, and then let's see if my Azure service is done. Published, right? So, okay. So let's go to my Azure portal. So all of you can do read writes with me. Yeah, Twitch is not our friend most days. All right, where is our service? I did not pin that service, so I'm going to have to go look for it. Azure BaaS customer, that is my service. All right, let's go ahead and pin this, and this is my URL now. So fingers crossed, right click. Okay, that's nothing, but I should have an API / customer, and that should pull up my data. Yay! All right, I'm going to post this as well, so all of you can see that what I've built is not fake. So essentially what we had was SQL Server in Azure. Then we built an ASP.NET Web API to point to that SQL Server table in Azure, and then we open it up with a simple RESTful endpoint. It should not take so many steps even to get to that, but it does. And that's how it is. Now, this is now an open API, does not have any protection to it, so please be gentle if you are playing around with this in Postman or Fiddler. But there's one more thing I wanted to do, because this is something that you might have issues with if you're trying to do this, and it is this guy. So for those of you who may not know about cores, let me try to explain this real quickly. So essentially what we have is a service. It's an ASP.NET Web API service deployed out on Azure. But if you are trying to consume this from a mobile, like a native app or a Xamarin app, you should be fine. But if you want to consume this from a mobile or from a web application, you can run into some issues, because by default, the web browsers are going to try to block that traffic, because you're essentially making a Ajaxified call, just a web service call to a domain that is not your own. So you're going to run into this, and it's going to complain about security issues. So I went through this tutorial, and they talk about different types of domains, and you can kind of build up on this. Essentially, it's a security policy that you need. So notice how they say build this up in an MVC app, and then essentially enable cores and all of that stuff that you have to do, and then you can start enabling cores on specific domains. But again, just if you wanted to flat out just make it work for everything, I found out this other Stack Overflow post, how to enable cores on an ASP.NET Core Web API, and this is kind of as simple as it gets. So here's what I will do, just in case. So we will go in here and get another NuGet package dependency. I'm going to search for cores. So you need that ASP.NET Cores thing, which opens it up automatically. So we'll let it go do that, accept. All right, hang on one second while it's doing it. Are you done? Where's my mouse pointer gone? There it is. Okay, it's done. So I'm essentially going to go look up this thing here, and this is what essentially does this. So I'm going to copy that whole thing, and there is a way in which you can enable cores on your server. So let me go back in my startup.cs, and ooh, what happened? Why are you giving me so much of squigglies? I didn't break anything, did I? No, it's all there. Why are you barking at me, Visual Studio? Build. How often do I stream? I try, the chat room is asking how often do I stream. I try going every Thursday for an hour, hour and a half, but this is coded live, so you're going to see, I'm Sam Basu, by the way. I'm a dev advocate at Progress Software. You can see a lot of my colleagues and guests all streaming with us. Okay, and variety of technologies, .NET, JavaScript, mobile, you name it. I did something that is making Visual Studio really unhappy. What did I do, Visual Studio? I didn't hurt you in any way. Go ahead and close. Look at that. He was just shouting at me. No, I did do something to Visual Studio. No, now it's gone. Come on, Visual Studio. All right. So this is what you need to do in here. So I copied that thing from Stack Overflow because that's how we code, right? We copy and paste. So we need to add cores. I like spelling things out, so bear with me. Options, and I'm going to call this options as well. So this is bringing in dependency through that. My policy now builder, another delegate, and then allow any origin, any method, any header. So this is not very safe. You don't probably want to do this for your app that you want to deploy in production. I'm just trying to showcase how to enable cores, and then you want to do this, I think, before you do the routing. or maybe before you do the endpoints, I think, essentially. So if I go in here and if I use app.use course, and then you have to grab the policy that you just defined. All right, and my policy was just called my policy, and do that. That's it. So at this point, let me just make sure I can build. I can redeploy this to Azure, but unless any of you are pulling this up right now from a web app, you're not going to see a difference. But essentially that built, and essentially what this is going to open it up is if anybody wants to consume our web API from a web project that's sitting on a different domain, you don't run into the course issues. So that's just a way of opening it up. So again, what I did was fairly basic. We had a SQL Server database that we first installed, and we put some data in it. We have a table called customer. So for any of that, start with the RESTful web API documentation, and then we started creating the scaffolders to give us the read, write, update, and delete. And then once you have it, I also had this page pulled up. So if you want to consume this, like from any .NET project, it's fairly simple. So you start with a HTTP client, and then you point to the URL, and you can do async and await and JSON convert. That's going to bring back the data that's deserialized from that service and make it work. But at this point, we should have, if I go look at, if I grab the link that my service is sitting at, it should be just straight up that, and then I can use this from any type of mobile web or desktop application. It's just RESTful endpoint at this point. Okay, so that's about all that I wanted to do. I went quite a bit over essentially, but this is my web API project. It has a mapping to my model. It has the DB context, so it has the entity framework pointing to and building a list of things, which is of the type customer. Then we scaffolded the controller, and at startup, essentially, we said, here's a DB context. That's my connection string. That's my addition for enabling course on it. And then I'm enabling the policy before I define the endpoints. And that's essentially it. So here's a quick and easy way of building a RESTful web API by hand, if you wanted to. And that's it. And then beyond that, you can consume this from any type of app that you're building. Postman, Fiddler, those are things that really help. And yeah, that's it. If the chat room has any more questions, I'm here. But that's pretty much all that I wanted to build. In the chat room, Emerald, Dimit, thanks for helping, by the way. Will you implement OData to the API? I'm actually running a little late. I have to get lunch out for my kid, so maybe we can do this on the next stream. But essentially what's been pointed out is the RESTful endpoint only has CRUD, so it does not have support for all of the OData features like querying and filtering and sorting and doing advanced options and operations on that RESTful endpoint. So that's another additional set of steps, but the web API project can stay. That's a good place to start. And then beyond that, we can add OData support for it. But this is just plain RESTful. I don't think I will have the time to build that out tonight, like today, but maybe at another next stream, I can go ahead and add the OData support for it. All right, so that's about all that I wanted to show. Let me go back to my big face, hopefully. So thank you all for hanging out. I know we had some tech issues with streaming software crashing on me a couple of times, but what am I looking at? Hang on one second. Did I not switch? Here. Okay, OBS is again not being my friend. Oh, there we go. I am on. So again, thank you folks for hanging out. Sorry about the tech issues, but I wanted to show something like from scratch. If you're building up a greenfield project, how to throw up your database in Azure, in AWS, doesn't really matter. Anything that you can have a connection string out of is what we need, and then we can build our RESTful endpoint with ASP.NET Web API running on .NET Core 3. Okay, so thank you again for hanging out with me, and we shall see you on another future stream right here on Code It Live. Okay, thanks and bye.